Hi, all. With these slides, I'm going to start the topic of semantic change. And so this is going to be a series of lectures on this topic, which is a key central one that we want to understand now as we learn our Greek and Latin roots. And so there's also a lecture outline that will help you follow along with this. There's a link to it on the syllabus right next to the topic of semantic change and metaphor. So if you have that in front of you, you can follow along there. So first of all, I'm going to give you some definitions now and some terms that we want to understand. The first basic term is metaphor, and this is really the most important concept of semantic change, the most fundamental one that we want to make sure that we're watching for and understanding as we analyze words and their meanings. So what is a metaphor? First of all, we can say that a metaphor involves the transfer of words from one thing or context to another thing. That's as simple as a kind of simple, straightforward definition. You just take some language, some words, some way of talking that belongs to one thing, and we call that the source that you're drawing the words from, and you apply those words to some other thing. That's your target. Another way of describing metaphor is that it's a figurative or non-literal use of words, because when you take words or language from one thing, the source, and apply them to the other, you're not applying them literally to the other thing. You're in some way, you're using some kind of figurative language to talk about the target, to try to communicate something about the target. And very often what we will see is that the transfer occurs from some physical, concrete thing to an abstract thing. So the physical, concrete thing would be the source, and the abstract thing is the target. So the idea here is that you can draw on physical things that are kind of easy to visualize and think about, and use language from them to try to talk about things that are more difficult to grasp and communicate and talk about. This is a basic function of metaphor. And we saw this with the word comprehend before, right? Because we saw that originally, or the basic literal meaning of comprehend is to grab and hold something. And that's something that's a physical action that's fairly easy to visualize and understand. And then we take the talk, that kind of language, the talk of grabbing and holding, and we use it to talk about the mind, some kind of mental activity. And of course, the mental activity of understanding something, of comprehending something, is not easy. You can't visualize it, right? It's not so easy to see. So when we use the word comprehend, or the development of the word comprehend, is that we've taken, at some point way back in history, long ago, even before the Greeks or the Romans were around, people took the idea of grabbing and holding, or the language of the talk of that, and used it to talk about what the mind does when it understands something. So this is a basic introduction to the term and the concept metaphor. And I gave you a reading. There's a link to a reading from a book called Introducing Metaphor. And I have some, so you should read that, but I also have picked out some key important points and quotes from this reading just to look at and to talk about a little bit. So first of all, notice that the book, the discussion of metaphor there, tells you that metaphor is a basic phenomenon in language, right? So this is why it's going to be so key and important to us. It's a basic phenomenon. It's not just the language of poets. It's not just fancy figurative talk. There's metaphor everywhere, and you're using metaphor all the time, even if you're not necessarily aware of the fact that you're using it. So this is one kind of key point to keep in mind about metaphor. Secondly, and this is something we're really going to look at and want to try to trace as we look at words that come from Greek and Latin. Metaphor is a basic process in the formation of words and of word meanings. In other words, one way in which a word can come to have more than one meaning, a variety of different meanings, is through metaphor, right? Because a word may retain its physical, basic, literal meaning, but then it may also have some kind of extended meaning where it's being applied to something else. And the term that we use for this state of having multiple meanings is polysemy. This is something that, again, is basic to language, it's fundamental, and it's also a fundamental problem, right? Because we have one reason why language is difficult to use is because words have such a variety, even a bewildering variety of meanings. But we call this state polysemy. And again, this is something that we're going to see over and over again with words that come from Greek and Latin. They have developed in all kinds of complicated ways, which we're trying to develop tools for being able to understand and use. And so for the word comprehend, which I gave you, or the kind of parts of the elements that comprehend is made up out of, we can see that it has developed, these basic words have developed a variety of different uses and meanings. So that, for example, the words comprehend and comprehension tend to have to do with understanding, right? So you comprehend something, or your reading comprehension has to do with your understanding. But the term comprehensive really does not refer to understanding at all. And this is something that some of you in your responses to one of the questions, I mean, you didn't lose points for this, but some of you wanted to say that a comprehensive test is one that tests your understanding. But that's not what comprehensive means in this case, right? Because think about it. Every test that you've ever taken tests your understanding. But not every test is comprehensive. What makes a test comprehensive? A test is comprehensive if it's all encompassing, all embracing, right? If it takes and holds everything. And some of you did get this exactly. But so notice the point here is that the words comprehend and comprehension refer to understanding. But the term comprehensive doesn't really refer to that. The term comprehensive has taken the idea of grabbing and holding and used it in a different metaphorical way, right? Because of course a test is also not a hand. A test doesn't reach out in front and grab and hold something. But we can metaphorically talk about a test as holding or containing things, even if it's not a container. And so it's a metaphorical use. Comprehensive is a metaphorical use, but it's a different meaning of this same basic idea. And then notice that the third word, prehensile, is a kind of a scientific term, and it tends to still have the basic physical meaning, right? Because a monkey's prehensile tail means that the tail can actually reach out and grab things. So there it's the same basic elements that are in comprehensive still have their literal meaning. So this is a key point then that we want to watch for, is the kind of the polysemy of words. And by understanding what the literal meanings of words are, we can try to trace this history. And now the next term also comes from the same book, which is a conventional or a dead metaphor. The word comprehend is an example of a conventional metaphor, because before I told you, you probably had no idea that comprehend really means to grab, and then it's being used metaphorically to try to communicate the idea of a mind understanding. So this is a case where comprehend is really a metaphor that has been institutionalized as part of our ordinary language. We're not even aware anymore that it is a metaphor. Now, one of the key points of this class, though, is that because you're going to be learning the Greek and Latin meanings, the meanings of these Greek and Latin roots, you're going to see all these metaphors come alive. They won't be dead or conventional to you anymore. They'll be alive and they'll make sense to you. And because you know the literal meanings of these words, then you'll be able to see and understand the whole variety of metaphorical uses that words get put to. And here's a point where I just want to read to you a little bit from page 14, and you can go and read this yourself, of course. It's in the reading on metaphor that illustrates this very point that I'm talking about here with conventional metaphor. So the authors say that some words may not at first seem metaphorical. However, many have developed through metaphorical uses of their root words in Latin, Greek, and other languages. Right? So this is exactly what we're going to be focusing a lot on. In chapter 1, we mentioned that the word isolated derived from the Latin word insula, meaning island. So this is a metaphorical use, right? We're taking the idea of an island and using it to describe the kind of a state of isolation that someone might be in, even if they're not on an island. And then they give some other examples, and they note that the etymological roots may conjure up visual images, right? So grabbing and holding is the meaning of the etymological root. And there's a visual image that conjures up. And then those visual images may suggest reasons why the words have their current English meanings, right? So you're going to be getting a kind of, by knowing the etymological roots of words and their meanings, you're going to be getting this kind of richer, deeper understanding of why English words have their meanings. And this, when you have that kind of understanding, of course, then you can use the words and you can understand the words better in context when you're reading them. So in any case, that's from page 14 of the reading on metaphor.